You know, there are some battles you just don't expect to fight. You buy a house in a decent neighborhood, you pay your dues, you keep your lawn tidy, and you figure, that's it, right? Smooth sailing. You expect a bit of peace, a place to unwind, maybe tinker with a hobby. For me, that hobby, my pride and joy, was, and still is, my 1968 Dodge Charger R/T, cherry red, black vinyl top, numbers matching 440 Magnum under the hood. I spent years restoring her, every nut, every bolt. She wasn't just a car, she was a work of art, a time capsule, a piece of my soul poured into chrome and steel. And I live in one of those neighborhoods with an HOA, the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. For the first few years, they were mostly invisible, just a newsletter now and then about gutter cleaning or the annual picnic. Little did I know, a storm was brewing, a storm shaped like a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and an ego the size of Texas. Her name was Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth, but in the privacy of my own head, and now, well, to you all, she quickly became HOA Karen or just Eleanor, when I'm feeling charitable, which isn't often when I think back on this whole mess. It all started, as these things often do, with something incredibly petty. I was out on a beautiful Saturday morning, sun shining, birds singing, the whole 9 yards. I pulled the Charger out of the garage onto my driveway, just giving her a good wax. Music playing softly from the garage speakers, a bucket of suds, the smell of carnauba in the air, my idea of heaven. Then, a shadow fell over me. I looked up, and there she was. Eleanor Ainsworth, chairwoman of the Architectural Review Committee, though you'd think from her demeanor she was the Queen of England inspecting the royal stables. She had this pinched look on her face, like she'd just smelled something foul, and her eyes, magnified by her severe glasses, were laser-focused on my car. "Mr. Davies," she began, her voice crisp and devoid of any warmth, "your vehicle. It's rather conspicuous." I blinked, chamois in hand. Conspicuous? It's a classic car, Mrs. Ainsworth. People usually find it rather attractive. A slight smile touched my lips, trying to keep things light. She was not amused. The bylaws state that vehicles must be parked in an orderly fashion and not cause any visual disruption to the aesthetic harmony of the community. I looked at the Charger, parked perfectly straight, well within the confines of my own driveway, gleaming under the sun. Visual disruption. She's just getting a wax. I do this every few weeks. She'll be back in the garage in an hour or 2. Eleanor's lips thinned. The rules are the rules, Mr. Davies. Prolonged display of vehicles undergoing maintenance on driveways can be construed as operating a repair business, which is strictly forbidden. Furthermore, its vibrant coloration might be considered out of step with the community's approved palette. My jaw nearly dropped. Vibrant coloration. It was a factory color. Approved palette. Were we living in a black and white movie? I managed to calm. I assure you, I'm not running a business. And her color is period correct. She's my hobby. Eleanor jotted something down on her ever-present clipboard. A warning will be issued. Please ensure the vehicle is garaged promptly, and with that, she pivoted on her sensible heels and marched off, leaving me fuming. A warning. For waxing my car on my own driveway. I run a business, all right, but it's got nothing to do with fixing cars in my driveway. I own Apex Towing and Recovery. Been in the family for 2 generations. I know a thing or two about vehicle regulations, about property rights, and about petty tyrants who get a little taste of power and let it go straight to their heads. At that point, though, I just chalked it up to a new HOA board member trying to make her mark. Annoying, yes, but surely, just a one-off. Oh, how wrong I was. That little seed of indignation she planted, though, it started to sprout. I resolved to reread those HOA bylaws myself, not just take her word for it. Little did she know, she wasn't just annoying a car guy, she was poking a bear who happened to own the very tools she might try to use against him. The irony, even then, wasn't lost on me, but I had no idea just how deep that irony would eventually run. For now, I just sighed, finished waxing my beloved Charger, and rolled her back into the sanctuary of the garage, a bitter taste in my mouth. The peace of my Saturday had been well and truly shattered. I diligently put the Charger away, figuring that would be the end of Eleanor Ainsworth's crusade against my classic. Maybe she just needed to feel like she'd asserted her authority. Boy, was I underestimating the depths of her petty ambition. About a week later, an official-looking envelope arrived from the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Inside, a crisp letter, complete with the HOA logo and Eleanor's imperious signature, informing me of a second notice of violation, my supposed crime this time. The letter cited a clause about inoperable vehicles and long-term projects not being visible from the street. My Charger. Inoperable. She had a freshly rebuilt engine that purred like a kitten and roared like a lion. Long-term project. The restoration was complete. This was maintenance, pure and simple. The letter sternly warned that failure to rectify this ongoing violation within 10 days would result in further action, including potential towing of the offending vehicle at the owner's expense. The nerve. My car was pristine, a show winner, and she was calling it an eyesore, an inoperable junker. This wasn't just a misunderstanding anymore, this was a deliberate, targeted attack. My blood began to boil. This woman, Eleanor, was on a power trip, and my Charger, my pride and joy, was her chosen victim. That's when the indignation truly solidified into determination. Okay, Mrs. Ainsworth, I thought, if it's a fight you want, it's a fight you'll get. But we're going to play by the actual rules, not the ones you invent in your head. The first thing I did was pull out the thick binder of HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS, and the most recent set of bylaws. I'd skimmed them when I bought the house, like most people do, but now I went through them with a fine-tooth comb, highlighting relevant sections, making notes. I cross-referenced her accusations with the actual text. Unsurprisingly, her interpretations were creative, to say the least. There was language about derelict vehicles, defined as those with flat tires, broken windows, or expired registration. My Charger had none of those. It was fully insured, registered, and in perfect running order. There was a clause about commercial vehicle parking, but nothing about a privately owned classic car being waxed on a Saturday. The approved palette she'd mentioned. Not a whisper of it in the documents regarding vehicle colors. This was pure fabrication, or at best, a wild misapplication of vague guidelines. I started a file, a dossier, on the people versus Eleanor Ainsworth. Every notice, every interaction, every piece of evidence was going in there. I even installed a new security camera overlooking my driveway, just in case. Better safe than sorry. Next, I decided to do a little reconnaissance. I remembered old Mr. Henderson from a few doors down. He'd lived in Willow Creek since it was built, seen HOAs come and go. Surely, he'd have some insight. I found him tending his roses. Mr. Henderson, I began, got a minute? I wanted to ask you about our esteemed Architectural Review Committee chairwoman, he chuckled, snipping a dead bloom. Ah, Eleanor. A real piece of work, that one. Got elected last year on a platform of restoring neighborhood values, which apparently means making everyone miserable with nitpicky rules. She tried to get Agnes Periwinkle cited for having garden gnomes that were too whimsical. Can you imagine? This was illuminating. So, I wasn't her first target. This was a pattern. She seems to have a particular dislike for my Charger, I said. Mr. Henderson nodded sympathetically. She's got a bee in her bonnet about anything that doesn't look like it rolled off a beige assembly line this year. Your car, son, it's got personality. Eleanor hates personality. He also mentioned that Eleanor had tried to strong-arm the board into giving an exclusive landscaping contract to her nephew's new company last spring. It failed, but not for her lack of trying. The picture was becoming clearer. Eleanor wasn't just a stickler for rules, she was an abuser of power, possibly with her own agenda. This wasn't just about my car anymore, it was about standing up to a bully who was trying to impose her will on the entire neighborhood. My resolve hardened. I wasn't just going to defend my car, I was going to make sure Eleanor Ainsworth learned a valuable lesson about messing with the wrong guy. The gears in my head were already turning, thinking about the unique resources at my disposal. My towing company, Apex, was known for its professionalism and adherence to the law. Oh, the delicious irony that was beginning to brew. Armed with my highlighted copy of the CC and RS and a growing sense of righteous indignation, I requested a meeting with the HOA board. I wanted to address these ludicrous accusations head-on, hoping that perhaps the other board members had a shred of common sense that Eleanor so clearly lacked. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday evening in the small, stuffy community clubhouse. I arrived a few minutes early, my meticulously prepared notes in hand. Eleanor was already there, seated at the head of the table, radiating an aura of self-importance. The other 4 board members trickled in, a nervous-looking accountant named David, a retiree named Susan who seemed generally pleasant but easily swayed, a younger guy, Mark, who mostly looked bored, and the HOA president, Mr. Carmichael, a man who clearly preferred avoiding conflict at all costs. I laid out my case calmly and rationally. I pointed to the specific clauses in the CC and RS, demonstrating how my charger did not violate any of them. I presented photographs of my car, proving its pristine condition. I even offered to have an independent mechanic verify its operability. As you can see, I concluded, these notices are based on a misinterpretation, or perhaps a willful misrepresentation, of the HOA guidelines. My car is a cherished classic, fully compliant, and I request these violations be rescinded. Eleanor listened with a smug, unyielding expression. When I finished, she didn't even glance at my evidence. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "while your passion for your automobile is evident, the Architectural Review Committee has determined it to be non-compliant. The rules are designed to maintain a certain standard in Willow Creek, a standard of quiet uniformity and aesthetic cohesion. Your vehicle, with its excessive chrome and, frankly, aggressive styling, simply does not fit quiet uniformity." Aggressive styling. Was she describing a car or a battle tank? Mr. Carmichael cleared his throat nervously. "Eleanor, perhaps we should review Mr. Davies' points." "There's nothing to review, Robert," Eleanor snapped, cutting him off. "The committee's decision is final. The violation stands." David, the accountant, fidgeted with his pen. Susan looked down at her lap. Mark was now scrolling through his phone. It was clear Eleanor ran this show, and the rest of them were either too intimidated or too apathetic to challenge her. My heart sank, but my resolve hardened. So, reason wasn't going to work. Fine. A few days later, the final warning arrived. It stated in no uncertain terms that if the violating vehicle was not permanently removed from view, meaning, presumably, never again to see the light of day on my driveway, even for washing, within 72 hours, it would be towed at my expense. The letter even helpfully listed the name of the towing company the HOA had contracted for such enforcement actions, Reliable Towing Services, a small, rather second-rate outfit I knew from my own industry dealings, known for being cheap and occasionally cutting corners. This was it. The gauntlet had been thrown. Eleanor was actually going to try and tow my car from my own property based on her trumped-up charges. A slow grin spread across my face. She had no idea. She was so blinded by her little power trip that she hadn't done the first bit of due diligence on who she was dealing with. Permanently removed from view, I mused. Okay, Eleanor. You want it removed? We'll see about that. I decided then and there not to fight this final notice directly with them. Instead, I'd let her make her move. I made sure the Charger was parked perfectly legally, well within my driveway, registration and insurance up to date and visible if anyone cared to look closely. It was clean, gleaming, practically daring her. I also made a few calls. First, to my general manager at Apex Towing, a sharp guy named Mike. I explained the situation, told him to be on alert for any unusual activity or calls regarding my address, but not to intervene directly just yet. Then, I set up my driveway security camera to record continuously and send alerts to my phone. The trap was laid. All I had to do was wait for Eleanor to walk right into it. The anticipation was almost unbearable, a mix of anger at her audacity and a thrilling sense of impending, well-deserved poetic justice. She picked the wrong car, Mrs. Ainsworth, I muttered to the empty room, and she definitely picked the wrong car owner. The next day, I had to be out for a good portion of the morning for a business meeting across town. I left with a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. Would today be the day? My phone buzzed around 10:30 a.m. It was an alert from my security camera. Motion detected on the driveway. I pulled over, my heart hammering, and opened the live feed. There it was. A flatbed tow truck from Reliable Towing Services backing into my driveway. And standing there, arms crossed, clipboard in hand, looking like a Roman emperor overseeing a conquest, was Eleanor Ainsworth herself. She was directing the tow truck driver, pointing imperiously at my Charger. I watched, a grim satisfaction mixed with a surge of anger, as the driver hooked up my baby. He was reasonably careful, I'll give him that, but the sight of my pristine Charger being winched onto the back of that flatbed, under Eleanor's smug supervision, made my blood boil. She even leaned over and stuck another notice on my front door, probably gloating about the tow. The sheer arrogance. I saved the footage, of course. Prime evidence. I let about an hour pass after I saw the Charger was gone from the feed. Then, I made my call. First, I called the HOA management office, feigning bewildered distress. Yes, hello, my name is Alex Davies, I live at 12 Willow Lane. My car, my classic 1968 Charger, it's gone from my driveway. I think it's been stolen. The receptionist, a young woman who always sounded harried, put me on hold. After a few minutes, she came back. Mr. Davies, Mrs. Ainsworth from the Architectural Review Committee asked me to inform you, if you called, that your vehicle was towed due to outstanding violations. She said you were repeatedly warned, her voice was flat, just relaying a message. Towed? I exclaimed, injecting a note of theatrical outrage. On what grounds? And by whom? I demand to know where my car is. The receptionist sighed. She said it was taken by Reliable Towing Services. You'll have to contact them regarding its release and any associated fees. She then gave me the number for Reliable. Perfect. Just as I'd anticipated. Now for the main event. I dialed Eleanor Ainsworth's direct number, which Mr. Henderson had kindly provided. She answered on the second ring, her voice practically purring with triumph. Eleanor Ainsworth speaking, Mrs. Ainsworth, I said, keeping my voice tight with what she would perceive as anger and frustration. This is Alex Davies. I understand you had my car towed from my private property. Ah, Mr. Davies, she replied, practically oozing smug satisfaction. Yes, as per the final notice you received. The vehicle was in clear violation of community standards. It has been removed. You can retrieve it from Reliable Towing, once all fines and fees are settled, of course. Perhaps this will teach you to respect the rules of our community. Her condescension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I let her savor her little victory speech. Then, I dropped the bomb. Reliable Towing, you say? That's very interesting, Mrs. Ainsworth. I paused for effect. Because, you see, I happen to own Apex Towing and Recovery. And Apex Towing and Recovery just acquired Reliable Towing Services last month. They are now a fully owned subsidiary of my company. Silence. Pure, unadulterated, glorious silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears in her brain grinding to a halt, smoke pouring from her ears. I pictured her face, the smugness draining away, replaced by a pale, dawning horror. It was a moment I will cherish for the rest of my days. When she finally spoke, her voice was a shaky whisper, a pathetic squeak compared to her earlier imperious tones. What did you say? I said, I repeated, slowly and clearly, savoring each word, Reliable Towing now works for me. Which means, Mrs. Ainsworth, that you, acting as an agent of the Willow Creek Estates HOA, contracted my company to unlawfully tow my car from my private property, based on fabricated violations. This is going to be problematic. For you. And for the HOA, I could hear a strangled gasp. This is a trick. A conflict of interest, she spluttered, already trying to deflect. Oh, there's a conflict, all right, I said, my voice now cold and hard as steel. But it's not mine. It's yours, for authorizing an illegal tow. My car was legally parked on my property. There were no legitimate grounds for its removal. You, Mrs. Ainsworth, have just committed unlawful conversion of property, and the HOA is party to it. I'll be having my legal team look into this immediately. And don't worry about contacting Reliable to sort this out, their manager already knows who I am. In fact, I'm heading over to my impound lot right now to inspect my vehicle and the paperwork you authorized. The line went dead. She'd hung up. I leaned back in my car seat, a wide, satisfied grin spreading across my face. Checkmate, Eleanor. The game had just fundamentally changed. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was, I imagine, pure chaos over at Eleanor Ainsworth's house, and soon, at the HOA office. I, on the other hand, was feeling a sense of calm, focused satisfaction. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd been flipped over, set on fire, and then used to roast marshmallows. Eleanor's attempt to portray me as some sort of rogue element in her pristine community had backfired spectacularly. She tried to paint my car as an offending vehicle, and now she was the one who had offended, legally and ethically. Her desperate accusation of a conflict of interest on my part was laughable. The only conflict was her manufactured rules versus actual law and my property rights. I drove over to the main impound yard for Apex Towing, which also now housed the much smaller inventory and records from the recently acquired Reliable Towing. My general manager, Mike, met me at the gate, a knowing look on his face. "Boss," he said, "you won't believe the call I just got from a very flustered-sounding woman named Eleanor Ainsworth. Started demanding we release a red Charger immediately, no questions asked, no fees. Said it was a terrible mistake." I chuckled. "Let me guess, she didn't mention she authorized the tow herself?" Mike grinned. "Not a word about that. Just that it needed to be rectified urgently. I told her all releases have to go through proper channels, and the vehicle owner would need to be present with proof of ownership and payment of outstanding fees, as per standard procedure." He paused. "Unless, of course, the owner directs otherwise." "Exactly," I said. "She contracted Reliable, now a division of Apex, to tow the car. So, technically, the HOA owes Apex for the tow and initial storage. An illegal tow, mind you, but a service was rendered based on their explicit instruction as an authorized agent." "Oh, this is rich." I walked into the yard, and there was my Charger, looking rather forlorn amongst a collection of genuinely derelict vehicles and repos. My beautiful R/T, seeing it there, even knowing I was in control, still stung. This was personal. "First things first, Mike," I instructed, "I want a full vehicle condition report done on the Charger, as if it were any other car brought in. Photos, checklists, the whole 9 yards. Document every square inch. I want to know if there's so much as a new fingerprint on her." While his team got to work, I went into the office to review the paperwork Reliable had on file for the tow. Sure enough, there was the authorization form, signed by Eleanor Ainsworth, for Willow Creek Estates HOA. The reason cited: persistent violation of community aesthetic standards and vehicle upkeep regulations. Utter nonsense. I made copies of everything. This was gold. Then, I called my lawyer, not just a friend this time, but my actual corporate counsel, a sharp woman named Jessica. I explained the whole sordid tale, from the initial warnings to the tow and my ownership of the towing company. Jessica listened patiently, and I could almost hear her smiling through the phone by the end of it. "Alex," she said, "this is beautiful. It's not often you see poetic justice serve itself up on a silver platter, or in this case, a flatbed. You have her dead to rights. Unlawful conversion, trespass to chattel, potential defamation if she's been telling people your car is derelict. The HOA is absolutely on the hook." We discussed strategy. The first step would be a formal demand letter to the HOA, outlining their liability, demanding compensation for the illegal tow, storage fees, payable to Apex, of course, which I'd then sort out internally, any potential damage to the vehicle, even if it was just the indignity of it all, and a formal retraction of all violations and an apology. "And what about Eleanor personally?" I asked. "Can we go after her?" Jessica said, "We can certainly name her in the demand, especially given her role as the direct instigator. Whether the HOA's insurance or bylaws protect her personally is something they'll have to figure out. But it puts pressure on them to deal with her." The power had shifted so completely it was almost dizzying. Eleanor, who thought she was wielding the mighty sword of HOA regulations, was now facing the very real consequences of her actions, and the entity she'd tried to use as her weapon was now, effectively, mine. The next few days were going to be very uncomfortable for Mrs. Ainsworth and the Willow Creek Estates HOA board. And honestly, I couldn't wait. The meticulous process of evidence gathering was, for me, almost as satisfying as that initial phone call to Eleanor. Mike and his crew at Apex did a thorough inspection of the Charger. Thankfully, the Reliable driver had been professional enough not to cause any new scratches or dings during the tow itself, but we documented everything: the pristine condition of the paint, the chrome, the interior. This was crucial to counter any absurd claim that the car was somehow neglected. We photographed the odometer reading, the VIN plate, the current registration sticker on the plate, and the insurance card in the glove box. Every detail was logged. I also had my driver, the one who actually performed the tow for Reliable, before it was fully integrated into Apex operations but after the acquisition papers were signed, write a detailed statement. His name was Ben, a young, no-nonsense guy. He remembered the tow clearly. Yeah, the lady, Ainsworth, Ben wrote in his statement, which I had him get notarized, she was real smug. Kept saying stuff like, finally getting rid of this eyesore, and, some people have no respect for rules. She seemed real happy to see it go. Didn't seem to care it was a classic, just that it offended her somehow. Ben also confirmed that the car was parked well within the property lines of my driveway, and there were no obvious signs of it being inoperable, no flat tires, no visible damage. He was just following the work order signed by an HOA representative, as per Reliable's, admittedly looser, pre-Apex, old protocol for HOA tows. His statement powerfully underscored Eleanor's personal vendetta and her malicious intent. With the vehicle report, Ben's statement, copies of Eleanor's violation notices, the HOA's own CC and RS, with my annotations, and the security camera footage of the tow itself, I had an ironclad case. Jessica, my lawyer, drafted a demand letter that was a masterpiece of legal polite fury. It was addressed to the Willow Creek Estates HOA Board of Directors, with a special carbon copy mailed directly to Mrs. Eleanor Ainsworth at her home address. The letter meticulously laid out the facts, the targeted harassment, the baseless violations, the illegal tow orchestrated by their agent, Mrs. Ainsworth, and the fact that the towing company they'd engaged was, in fact, owned by me. It detailed the specific bylaws they had breached, not just the ones Eleanor had invented, but actual procedural rules they'd ignored regarding proper notice and due process for disputes. It demanded 1. Immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all violation notices concerning my vehicle. 2. A formal written apology from the HOA board and from Mrs. Ainsworth personally. 3. Full reimbursement to Apex Towing and Recovery for the towing and storage fees, calculated at standard commercial rates, of course. The invoice for this was attached. 4. Compensation for my personal time wasted, distress, and the temporary unlawful conversion of my property. We set a reasonable but firm figure for this. 5. A commitment from the HOA to review and retrain its committee members on the proper application of bylaws and respect for homeowner rights. We gave them 10 business days to respond favorably, after which we would initiate legal proceedings without further notice, seeking all available damages and legal costs. The letter also strongly suggested they consult their own legal counsel immediately. I almost felt a twinge of pity for the other board members, who were likely about to have a very unpleasant awakening to the reality of Eleanor's reign. Almost. But they had enabled her, either through active support or passive cowardice, so they deserved a taste of the consequences too. As an extra little twist, I used my knowledge from Apex's old Reliable records. It turned out Eleanor had, on a few previous occasions, tried to get expedited tows on other residents with Reliable, and had hinted at wanting a preferred customer discount for the HOA if they gave Reliable all their business. Reliable's previous owner, a bit overwhelmed, had mostly ignored her, but the notes were there. While not directly relevant to my case, it painted a broader picture of her manipulative behavior, something I tucked away in case things escalated further. The squeeze was on. I imagined Eleanor opening that letter, her face turning various shades of purple. The ball was now firmly in their court, a court where I suddenly owned the stadium, the team, and the referee's whistle. The 10-day deadline stipulated in Jessica's demand letter seemed to light a fire under the Willow Creek Estates HOA. For the first few days, there was a deafening silence. I imagined frantic phone calls, hushed meetings, and a whole lot of finger-pointing happening behind closed doors. Eleanor, I pictured, was probably alternating between hysterical denial and furious attempts to bully the other board members into fighting me. Then, on day 5, I got a call from Mr. Carmichael, the HOA president. His voice was shaky, a stark contrast to Eleanor's earlier smugness. "Mr. Davies," he began, his tone conciliatory, almost pleading. "Robert Carmichael here. We received your lawyer's letter. There seems to have been a significant misunderstanding." I let him squirm. "A misunderstanding, Mr. Carmichael? Or a deliberate abuse of power by your architectural review chairwoman?" He cleared his throat. "Well, Eleanor can be overzealous. Look, we're very sorry about this whole situation with your car. Of course, we'll waive any fines. And, perhaps we can just arrange for you to pick up your car from your lot, and we can call it even." I laughed. A short, sharp, humorless sound. Call it even. Mr. Carmichael, your agent, Mrs. Ainsworth, orchestrated the theft of my property from my driveway. She libeled me and my vehicle. My company incurred costs. I incurred costs and considerable distress. We are far from even. My lawyer's letter clearly outlines our terms for resolution. I suggest you reread it carefully. There was a pause. Yes, well, the financial demands, they seem rather steep, he stammered. The HOA operates on a tight budget, you know, perhaps, I replied coolly. Mrs. Ainsworth should have considered the budget before engaging in illegal activities on the HOA's behalf. Or perhaps the HOA should have better oversight over its committee chairs. The fees charged by Apex Towing are standard industry rates. My claim for personal damages is, frankly, quite restrained given the circumstances. I could hear him sigh. Eleanor is insistent that she was within her rights. Then Eleanor is mistaken, I said firmly. And if the HOA intends to stand by her erroneous interpretation of her rights, then we will see you in court. My lawyer, Jessica, is quite looking forward to it. Discovery, depositions, it could get very illuminating for the other homeowners in Willow Creek when the details of Mrs. Ainsworth's conduct become public record. That last part seemed to hit a nerve. The thought of a public lawsuit, of depositions revealing Eleanor's vendetta and the board's spinelessness, clearly terrified him. No, court is not what we want, he said quickly. Let me talk to the other board members again. And our attorney. We'll be in touch. A couple of days later, Jessica received a call from a lawyer representing the HOA. He was, by all accounts, much more pragmatic than Mr. Carmichael and certainly more clued in than Eleanor. He tried a bit of bluster initially, suggesting my ownership of the towing company complicated matters in a way that was disadvantageous to me, a truly creative argument I had to admire for its sheer audacity, but Jessica swatted that down easily. She reiterated our position: the tow was illegal, plain and simple. My ownership of the towing company was an ironic footnote, not a mitigating factor for them. The HOA lawyer then shifted to negotiation. Could we reduce the personal damages? Could the apology be from the board only, not Eleanor personally? Jessica held firm, as per my instructions. We wanted full accountability. We wanted Eleanor's name on that apology. We wanted a clear message sent. Word also started to leak out amongst the neighbors. I hadn't said much directly, but Mr. Henderson, bless his gossipy heart, had apparently overheard snippets of Eleanor's panicked phone calls and started piecing things together. People were starting to ask questions. Why was Eleanor suddenly looking so stressed? What was this about a car being towed? The pressure was mounting on the HOA from multiple directions. Their attempt to quietly sweep this under the rug was failing miserably. They were learning, the hard way, that when you poke a hornet's nest, you're going to get stung, especially if that hornet owns the company that makes the stingers. The climax of this whole ridiculous saga arrived not in a courtroom, but in an emergency HOA board meeting, one to which I was specifically invited, or rather, my lawyer and I were. Mr. Carmichael had called, his voice funereal, requesting our presence to discuss a resolution. This wasn't going to be a negotiation, this was going to be their surrender. We arrived at the community clubhouse, the same stuffy room as before, but the atmosphere was palpably different. The smugness was gone. Fear and resentment hung heavy in the air. Eleanor Ainsworth was there, looking pale and drawn, avoiding eye contact. The other board members, David, Susan, and Mark, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Their lawyer, a harried-looking man named Peterson, sat beside Mr. Carmichael. Jessica and I took our seats, a thick binder of our evidence placed firmly on the table in front of us. Mr. Carmichael cleared his throat. Mr. Davies, Ms. Albright, he got Jessica's name wrong, which she coolly corrected. Thank you for coming. We want to resolve this amicably. Jessica took the lead. Mr. Carmichael, Mr. Peterson, she began, her voice calm but firm, my client, Mr. Davies, has been subjected to a campaign of harassment by your Architectural Review Committee Chair, Mrs. Ainsworth, culminating in the unlawful towing of his vehicle. Our letter of demand clearly outlines the numerous violations of your own CC and RS, as well as state law. We are here to hear your full acceptance of our terms. Eleanor started to speak. This is an outrage. He's manipulating. But Mr. Peterson quickly put a hand on her arm, silencing her with a sharp look. He then addressed us. My clients, the HOA board, have reviewed the situation and they are prepared to meet your terms to avoid further litigation. He slid a document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. Jessica picked it up and reviewed it carefully, while I watched Eleanor. She was practically vibrating with suppressed rage, her face tight. She looked like a thwarted cartoon villain. Jessica nodded. The terms appear to be mostly in order, she said. Full payment of the invoice towing and storage fees to Apex Towing and Recovery. Payment of the agreed sum for personal damages to Mr. Davies. A formal letter of apology, to be signed by all board members, including Mrs. Ainsworth, explicitly retracting all violation notices and apologizing for the distress caused. And a commitment to mandatory retraining for all committee members. Then came the part I'd been waiting for, the part that wasn't explicitly in our financial demands but was a crucial outcome. Mr. Carmichael spoke, his eyes downcast. Furthermore, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, the board has had a discussion regarding Mrs. Ainsworth's position. Effective immediately, Mrs. Ainsworth will be stepping down as chair of the Architectural Review Committee. Eleanor gasped audibly. You can't do this, she hissed. I was elected. Eleanor, Mr. Carmichael said, finally finding a sliver of backbone, your actions have exposed this HOA to significant legal and financial liability. You acted outside your authority and contrary to the advice you were given. The board has lost confidence in your ability to serve responsibly. Your resignation from the committee is expected. Eleanor looked like she was about to explode. Her face was blotchy red. She glared at me with pure venom. You did this. No, Mrs. Ainsworth, I said calmly, meeting her gaze. You did this to yourself. You let a little bit of power go to your head. You picked a fight you couldn't win, based on rules you made up. All I did was defend my property and my rights, using the resources available to me. She sputtered, speechless for a moment, then grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members looked visibly relieved. The tyrant had been deposed. The rest of the meeting was a formality, signing the agreement. As we left, Mr. Carmichael actually shook my hand. Mr. Davies, he said, I am truly sorry this happened. We'll make sure nothing like this occurs again. I simply nodded. The proof would be in their actions. But for now, it was over. Justice, with a healthy dose of irony, had been served. The days following that HOA meeting were sweet. The official letter of apology arrived, signed by all board members, including a very begrudging-looking signature from Eleanor Ainsworth. It was framed and now hangs in my garage, right next to a photo of the Charger, a little reminder of the victory. The checks cleared, one to Apex Towing and Recovery for the full invoiced amount of the tow and storage, which, after covering actual costs, I decided to put towards a hefty bonus for Ben, the driver, and an end-of-year party for the Apex crew. They deserved it for their professionalism and for putting up with my weird personal vendetta unfolding at work. The other check was to me, for personal damages, which more than covered my legal fees and left a nice little sum that I immediately invested back into the Charger, a new set of period-correct tires she'd been needing and a professional detailing that made her gleam even more than usual. Eleanor Ainsworth, as promised, was no longer the chair of the Architectural Review Committee. In fact, word around Willow Creek was that she'd become something of a pariah. No one wanted to be associated with her after the details of her little escapade, and the potential cost to the HOA she'd nearly incurred, started to circulate, largely thanks to Mr. Henderson's surprisingly efficient neighborhood grapevine. Last I heard, she was considering selling her house and moving. Good riddance, I thought. Some people just can't handle even a sliver of authority without turning into petty dictators. My beautiful Charger was, of course, back in my driveway, and then safely tucked into my garage, none the worse for her adventure. In fact, she seemed to sit a little prouder, if that's possible for a car. I made a point of washing and waxing her on my driveway the very next Saturday, just because I could. A few neighbors walked by, gave me a thumbs up and a knowing smile. Even Mr. Carmichael waved sheepishly as he drove past. The atmosphere in Willow Creek Estates felt lighter, less oppressive. It was amazing how one person's toxic influence could cast such a pall over a community, and how its removal could feel like a breath of fresh air. I also took a proactive step at Apex Towing. I reviewed our policies for handling HOA-initiated tows. We implemented a new protocol, any tow requested by an HOA from private property now required a signed indemnification form from the HOA, explicitly stating they had followed all their own due process and were accepting full liability if the tow was later found to be unlawful. It also required specific citation of the bylaw allegedly violated, not just vague statements. It was a small change, but it would help protect other homeowners from similar abuses by overzealous HOA board members, and it would protect my company from being dragged into illegitimate disputes. If an HOA wasn't willing to sign that, we wouldn't take the job. Simple as that. It turns out, Eleanor's folly had a positive ripple effect beyond just my own satisfaction. The whole ordeal taught me a few things. Firstly, never underestimate the fury of a petty tyrant with a clipboard. Secondly, always know your rights and the rules you're supposed to be living under. Often, they're your best defense. And thirdly, sometimes, the universe has a funny way of delivering poetic justice. My owning the very towing company Eleanor tried to use against me was a stroke of luck, sure, but it was the meticulous documentation, the calm refusal to be bullied, and the willingness to see it through that truly won the day. The hidden skill, my business, became the ultimate Uno reverse card. The moral high ground felt pretty good too. I hadn't broken any rules, hadn't resorted to her level. I just used the system, and her own actions, to bring about her downfall. The satisfaction was immense, not just in winning, but in seeing someone who abused their power face real consequences. It was a triumph for every homeowner who's ever felt railroaded by an overzealous HOA. Looking back now, that whole drama feels almost surreal. Life in Willow Creek has returned to its normal, quiet rhythm. The new Architectural Review Committee chair is a reasonable retired architect who actually seems to like well-maintained classic cars. I still see Eleanor Ainsworth occasionally at the local supermarket. She always makes a point of turning her cart abruptly down another aisle if she spots me. I just smile. My Charger. She's doing great. We go to car shows, we cruise on sunny afternoons. Sometimes, when I'm polishing her chrome, I think about Eleanor and her aesthetic harmony. My car is a testament to a different kind of harmony, the harmony of a perfectly tuned engine, the gleam of hand-polished paint, and the sweet, sweet sound of justice served cold. If there's a lesson in all this for anyone out there dealing with their own HOA Karen, it's this: document everything. Read your bylaws cover to cover. Don't be afraid to stand your ground, politely but firmly. And hey, if you happen to own the company they try to use to screw you over, well, that's just the cherry on top of the victory sundae, isn't it? She thought she was towing a nuisance, she ended up torpedoing her own little empire. And all because she messed with the wrong guy, and the wrong 1968 Dodge Charger. Peace was restored, but you can bet I keep those driveway cameras active, and my copy of the CC and RS is never too far away. You just never know when the next self-appointed guardian of quiet uniformity might decide your happiness is a violation.